Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland. For those of you who are classical music fans, the city of Winona is now offering a Beethoven Festival, which brings classical music events to our city throughout the summer. Mr. Hugh Miller initiated the idea of the festival, and through his support as well as others, this festival began in 2007. Not only do the best musicians and orchestras come to Winona to perform for us, but they use the best instruments. This leads us to the story we're going to hear today, a story about the Steinway grand piano and its connection to the Beethoven Festival.
You will be seeing this beautiful 9-foot concert Steinway piano, originally built in 1931, throughout July as it is moved from place to place to be played for each of the Minnesota Beethoven Festival events held in Winona. And if you arrive early enough, you may just find Joel Lidstrom tuning it and preparing it for the day's performances. Joel is one of the top restorers of Steinway pianos in the country.
Hi, Joel.
Hi, Joyce.
Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland, Joel.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is Joel Lidstrom, who actually is not only the piano tuner of this fine instrument, but he also is the person who restored this piano to its magnificent condition. Now tell us, Joel, how in the first place did the Beethoven Festival acquire this piece from you?
Well, I've had this instrument a good number of years, but it was not in this condition. It had languished in my shop in terrible condition, needing restoration, and I finally had a spot in my schedule that I could do it. I had completed the instrument, and when Mary Berichter called me with a request to restore another Steinway for her, while I was working on the instrument, I asked her if she was interested in having the piano in her home and playing it, using it, until her instrument was completed. I had delivered the piano to her, and she had arranged for Ned Kirk, the piano professor at St. Mary's here, to come play the instrument. He came over and played it. We listened for quite some time. He played it spectacularly, and during his performance, Mary's husband, Bob Kierlin, was there and listened as well. And after Ned had left, Bob approached me and asked if I would provide the move of the piano, the tuning, the voicing, the setup of the instrument for all this coming year's concerts. Would I sell the piano to him for donation to the Beethoven Festival? And of course, I was ecstatic.
So that means with every single concert that's coming up, you have to travel to that venue and tune the piano at that spot.
That's correct.
Well, you can be a busy man.
Well, it's a real pleasure prepping a piano for concert artists. And in this particular situation, having sold the instrument, I want to stay in touch with it. It's a wonderful thing.
Sure, it's probably very close to your heart. Well, let's find out exactly how did you acquire this piano in the first place?
I've had this piano for over 10 years. I was interested in acquiring the instrument. I knew that it existed at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. It sat in the main hall, hadn't been used in probably decades, but they were unwilling to sell it. Public institutions cannot just sell pianos. So I took it on trade against the restoration of another instrument for the music department. It was in horrific condition. It was not playable. It was not tunable. There were chunks out of the legs. The cabinet was in terrible shape, but more importantly, the tuning pins were so loose that the instrument couldn't be tuned. Things had been spilled in it. The keys didn't function. The dampers that stopped the sound were unglued from the damper moldings because of pop being spilled in it. It had just been in a very bad situation for many, many years and had been neglected and abused.
Well, Joel, how did the University of Wisconsin acquire this piano in the first place?
Well, this instrument was originally a Steinway-owned concert instrument for artists. There's a designation here on the plate, CD 31. It was used only in concert halls by concert artists. But after 10 years of that, typically, Steinway sells the instruments, gives a local hall the first shot at buying the instrument, and in that the instrument had been in La Crosse at a hall, it was offered for sale there, it was purchased, it remained in La Crosse, and when that concert hall was torn down, it moved around and ultimately found its way to the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Virtually all artists in the world want to play Steinways. There are other manufacturers, but everyone wants to play a Steinway.
Sure. All right, now let's talk a little bit about exactly what you did to reconstruct this piano. Let's talk about the inners of this piano right here. What exactly did you have to do here?
Well, what we see here, it all looks new, even though much of it is not. The most striking part of the inside of the piano here is the cast iron plate. This is original. It's cast iron. It probably weighs, this piece of metal weighs perhaps 550 pounds. It's been repainted. It's been sanded and repainted. The raised letters have been hand-painted by my daughter, Zoe. She does this on every instrument. The strings are all new. You'll notice the bass strings. These are very unusual. They will appear to be gray in color. They are iron wrapped, which is highly unusual. Most, if not all, bass strings over the past 100 years have been wrapped with copper, not iron. Steinway, for a period of about 30 years, wrapped their bass strings in their finest instruments with iron. And it produces a much more open, transparent, and symphonic sound, I might say. So that's very unusual. The dampers are all new. The dampers are what stop the sounds. The tuning pins are new. The strings are new. The soundboard, the spruce soundboard beneath the strings that amplifies the sound is original. It was full of cracks, and the cracks have been repaired with shims. There are shims periodically in the soundboard, and if you look closely, you can see perhaps a slightly different color to the spruce of the shim relative to the spruce around it. Steinway makes such great soundboards, and spruce appreciates with age. We all know that from violins. Although pianos, the crown, the curvature of a piano soundboard changes over decades of all the force of the strings on the soundboard. So occasionally they need replacement. But this instrument has a spectacular soundboard. It reproduces sound very wonderfully. This section of bridge is new. All the bridge pins are new, the nickel-plated bridge pins. The duplex scaling, this is an interesting concept that Steinway developed well over 100 years ago. These metal bars are in, and they allow the instrument to reproduce sound that's sympathetic to the parts of the strings that are vibrating, and it enhances the sound, creates a bigger sound. It's one of the reasons that Steinway is the preferred concert instrument in the world today, that idea and how they implemented it.
I can't imagine taking this apart. I mean, did you take these things apart and put them back?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Well,
what a labor of love.
Well, it is. We have an instrument typically 6 months while we're restoring it. A large amount of labor goes into restoring the cabinetry. There's no question that refinishing an instrument like this is a real challenge. But beyond that, the technical work that's done on it, and we haven't touched on the action yet. I can pull the action out. Would you like to see that?
I would love to see that as well.
The action is a very complex mechanism. I'll slip it out. We can take a look.
Boy, you're scaring me taking this apart.
It's always amazing to people when they see a keyboard of a grand piano come out the first time. They don't realize how easily this happens. And
fascinating.
Here we are.
Beautiful.
So now we have the original keys. Remarkably, we have the original ivories on this instrument. 75-year-old pianos typically don't have their original ivories because ivory is fragile and fractures, cracks, and at this age, they're usually in poor shape. These were in just splendid shape, and it seems such a shame to replace them with anything new, particularly plastic. The hammers that strike the strings are all new. The hammer shanks that the hammers are glued to, and their leather knuckles. These are all new. The whippings that push the hammers toward the strings, these are all new. The back checks are all new. All the felt in the keyboard is all new. So essentially, even though structurally the structure of the action is original, all the parts in it have been replaced. So the moving parts designed for replacement have all been replaced in this instrument, so it's essentially new.
Wow, you must have the patience of a saint to be able to put each little individual key back together.
I have patience for things that I enjoy, and I have very little patience for those things that I don't. So,
Joel, how long did it take you to restore this piano?
well, typically we'll have an instrument for 6 months. Often we'll have in excess of 1,000 hours labor in restoring a piano, and sometimes it can be considerably more. I've never counted the hours that go into an instrument because I know that I'd discover that I wasn't making enough money per hour. So I just work until I achieve what I feel to be perfection or as close to it as I possibly can achieve.
All the work that you've put into this is absolutely amazing. But what about the cabinetry? Did you also restore the cabinetry?
Absolutely. We restore the cabinets of every instrument we do. This instrument was in very bad shape. The finish was cracking and dull. There were chunks out of the legs. But more important than just repair, it's really important for me to have an instrument that looks as good as it sounds and plays. It's cared for better in this setting when faculty and students approach an instrument that looks like this, they'll treat it with much better respect than if it still looked old despite sounding and playing well. So it's very important to me to restore a cabinet to this kind of beauty.
After seeing Joel take apart the keyboard so effortlessly at St. Mary's University, where the piano is stored between festival events, I followed him to his workshop in Caledonia, Minnesota, to learn more about the restoration of these beautiful instruments.
Joel, it fascinates me, too, that you even began attempting something like this. How, first off, did you ever get into restoring pianos?
Well, when I was a teenager, for whatever reason, and I can't explain it, I thought I could tune a piano. So I had my mother call our tuner. I'd never even watched him tune a piano, and yet I had this inclination. So she called him, he sold me a tuning lever and some tuning tools, and I proceeded to tune a piano. And I found out that you have to know something to tune a piano. So that sort of simmered for the next good number of years, and it wasn't until I studied music at the University of Minnesota that I supplemented my music studies as a classical guitarist with my interest in piano technology, and I took a course. I have to say that what I learned in the piano technology course was very little. They weren't teaching very much, but it was enough to propel me in that direction. And I ended up working for the Steinway dealer in Minneapolis, Schmidt Music, for a brief while. But I had an opportunity to move to this area and establish a piano service department at Leitholtz in La Crosse. Shortly thereafter, I decided, having spent time at the Steinway dealership, that I wanted to restore only Steinways. So it was very early on I made that decision, and I've made my career restoring virtually only Steinways. There have been exceptions, Börsendorfers, Bechsteins, or Mason and Hamlins from the turn of the century. These are great instruments.
I look around this room, and you've got several of them going here. It seems like you've got 3. Why don't you take us through the process of what it takes to restore a Steinway? Maybe starting with this one right here. Looks fabulous and it looks very old.
This is a particularly remarkable instrument, having been manufactured in 1865, only 6 years after Steinway began production of pianos in the United States. They called it a Type 1, and this is a Type 1, so it is the original model instrument that Steinway's first made in 1859. Purchased it for restoration. So, how was it when I bought it? It was virtually black. You couldn't see that it was Brazilian rosewood. The lid was cracked down the middle. The legs had huge chunks out of them. Here you see an example of the legs as they are now after repair. It's a spectacularly hand-carved leg, and interestingly, this is not Brazilian rosewood. This is poplar, and I have grained it to look like rosewood. This is what Steinway did. If you built a leg, a piano leg out of rosewood, this massive a leg, it would split. It just would not hold up. And in stripping and sanding, that was lost, so I had to recreate that grain. So I'm hoping that if you look at this, you can't tell that it's not rosewood.
Joel, you didn't really do this.
Yes.
You faux painted this?
Yes.
That is fantastic. What a beautiful job.
Oh, thanks.
You really know your craft.
Well, necessity is the mother of invention. I had never done such a thing until I had to do it. And actually, all the Steinways from the 1910, 20, 30s, the mahogany instruments, were originally maple legs, and I have to faux grain the maple legs to look like the mahogany. So it's a task I enjoy a lot.
So is it easy to get the legs off of these pianos?
Oh, it is. They come off readily, and the only way to move a grand piano is to take the legs off and tip it on its side. This cast iron plate, it's a full perimeter plate. It's a massive piece of metal. It's not from a Steinway. It's from a 1907 or 8 Mason and Hamlin. Mason and Hamlin was a manufacturer that made sure to sell their instruments for a higher price than Steinway, and many pianists of the day thought they were the equal of Steinway. Unfortunately, the company didn't really survive. But what I've got going here is the tuning pins that hold the strings of the piano are driven into what's called a pin block. It's a piece of metal, a piece of wood with many plies. This is tremendously hard and dense wood, and I am fitting it against this flange because the strings will be attached through tuning pins coming through this piece of wood and pulling this direction to the extent of about 20 tons. There's that much pull of approximately 230 strings, each of which is almost at 200 pounds per square inch. So this piece of wood has to be tightly mated to this cast iron flange. If this wood can flex and move when the piano is strung, the piano will not stay in tune. So I am rubbing this piece of wood, the pin block, against graphite on this flange, turning it over, and I can see where there's a transfer of graphite, and then I will grind that away and keep doing that until this piece of wood is contacting the flange everywhere from one end to the other. Another thing that is very important that needs to be done on an old instrument, soundboards crack. Many people believe that if a soundboard cracks, the instrument is worthless. Quite to the contrary. Steinways of this age, any instrument of this age, the spruce will crack, and it just needs to be repaired effectively. So here I'm cutting channels where there are cracks. Here was a very massive crack in the soundboard here. I cut a channel, and then I cut a piece of spruce. This piece of spruce is from another instrument about the same age, and I've shaped this shim to exactly fit in the channel. Many of the channels I cut on soundboards I do with a small router, but often because of the location of the bridge and the side of the piano, I need to work by hand. So I have a soundboard plane, and with it, I just cut down through the crack until I'm the depth I want to be, and then I make a shim to fit it and glue it in place. Everyone is familiar with the keys, and here we have a set of keys from a 80-year-old Steinway. The key tops are replaced. Typically, our key tops are either cow bone or ivory, and new ebony sharps that have been repositioned and dressed on their side. So essentially, these keys are like new. And then the mechanism of the instrument, the frame is original, but all the hammer shanks to which the hammers are glued, these are all new, and the whippings that the keys engage to push the hammer toward the strings are all new as well. So once the instrument is restored, the action is virtually new with all new parts. The finish on a piano, depending on the condition of the instrument, first the finish has to be stripped. We have to sand the wood back to its original color because wood is often sun-bleached. There are often is veneer to replace. There are repairs to be made. Then an instrument such as this has to be stained. It's stained with a water dye, not your average stain that you get at a hardware store. And after that, we put on a polyester finish that is then ground down glass smooth everywhere, so none of the grain is showing. It's all smooth as glass. And then about 15 coats of lacquer are put on it, and then those are sanded down glass smooth as well before the instrument is finally rubbed out to its final sheen. And it's somewhere between satin and high gloss. It's a very elegant look.
Wow, there are so many unbelievable steps. Which step do you enjoy the most?
What I enjoy most is taking an old Steinway that was played by musicians 100 years ago, 120 years ago, and making that instrument sing again. I like all aspects of it, but if I had to pick one thing I enjoy doing most, it's hanging hammers and voicing an instrument, especially for concert artists.
Oh, and what does voicing mean?
Voicing, making the instrument sing with the tone quality that an artist wants, so that they can best express the music.
Okay. And do you think you accomplished that with the Beethoven Festival piano?
Oh, absolutely. After hearing it, I'm very, very pleased.
Joel Lidstrom has restored this grand concert Steinway piano back to its full potential. He has renewed its capability of once again singing for its audience. Ned Kirk, chairman of St. Mary's University Music Department and the artistic director of the Minnesota Beethoven Festival, has joined us to tell us more about the importance of the piano to the festival and to give us the opportunity of hearing this magnificent instrument sing.
Our mission includes connecting with young people, but it includes connecting with people, anybody who has not had the opportunity to be exposed to classical music, and that's the bottom line. Beethoven is our namesake, perhaps the most recognizable name to anybody. People who are not exposed to music know who Beethoven is, so it's a wonderful way to sort of launch ourselves, and it serves as a wonderful path into all other types of classical music beyond Beethoven. I have actually engaged artists who will only play on Steinways. And if you don't have one, you have to get one somewhere, and not all venues and concert series can do that. So we have this wonderful ability to have the instrument that they require at all times. The festival, of course, uses many venues throughout Winona, and so as we move from venue to venue, depending on what we're offering, the piano will be moved as well. That includes a couple of concerts here in Filio Recital Hall at St. Mary's, but also concerts at Thompson Auditorium and St. Cecilia Theater at Cotter High School.
Wonderful. So we get to hear it at its best. And now I understand you're going to play a few pieces for us, or why don't you just tell us exactly what you're going to play for us?
I'm going to play just the very beginning of the Brahms Handel variations, the theme and 3 variations.
Okay. Well, we look forward to hearing it.
Thank you.
I would like to give special thanks to Hugh Miller for initiating the Minnesota Beethoven Festival in Winona, and to Mary Berichter and Bob Kierland for donating this magnificent instrument to the festival. Also, thanks to Joel Lidstrom for restoring this old Steinway to its top form, and to Ned Kirk for making the piano sing beautifully. And especially thank you to the Beethoven Festival for bringing us the music. This has been Joyce Woodworth. Thanks for joining me. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of the Heartland.